Well, welcome to Costa Rica. My name is Johnny from Johnny Knows Costa Rica. Today we have the pleasure of being with a true expert in Mexico. He is not just an expert in Mexico, but he's becoming a real expert in Spanish too. But we're going to talk about that. Here, I'm going to bring you on, but with further ado, let me bring on Paul, a great friend of mine. Let me put him on the stage. Paul,
Hey, Johnny, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. I think we can both hear each other now.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, tell us about yourself and how you became, in my opinion, an expert in Mexico, but how that happened and a little bit about who you are.
Well, I don't know if I'd use the word expert. I'd say I'm knowledgeable about Mexico. I moved to Mexico with my wife in 2015 after I retired. I was a deputy sheriff for 25 years, and we decided to try to, start a new adventure in a new country, look for a low cost of living, see if we could live on a third of our income and live well. And we found that in Mexico. So, moving to a new country, and the language was not a barrier for us. My wife and I both speak Spanish, but you realize pretty quickly you don't know how to do anything. You don't know how to register your car. You don't know how to get a driver's license. We had trouble finding milk. I'd go to the grocery store and I'm looking for milk and I'm in the refrigerated section. I can't find it. I'm walking everywhere and there was none in the refrigerated section. It was all boxed milk. I mean, something as simple as that. So I'm the kind of person that I've got to know how everything works. So I really just dedicated myself to learning all about the new country. And in the mornings, obviously I would do what most people do, and you look at the online news and see what's going on, look for some sales because, we're thrifty retirees at the time. And then I would also go to the government sites and read about new laws and read existing laws. And I learned about import law and immigration law, powers of law enforcement, and how everything worked, how the government worked, how elections worked, everything. And then I just started writing about these things in the morning, just for myself. I started a little blog. I would keep it to about 650 words. And at the time, several of my neighbors came up to me and they said, "Hey, Paul, I see you're doing like a little blog in the morning." And I'm like, "Yeah, just something to do." Yeah, your blog's really boring, Paul. You write about a lot of boring things, laws and how things work in Mexico. So it was mostly just for me, but then it became a thing. People found the blog. I picked up about 60,000 readers.
Only 60,000?
Yeah, only 60,000 for that. I do more on YouTube now. I've just been really lucky that I don't know why. It's just those things have worked out. I like to do my research and I like to report it to people. And I think they like the really short, concise way I do that. But it's worked out for me. So,
Paul, you know what? Think I think this is a good way for us to introduce what we're talking about the two countries, myself and Costa Rica. Being here, I have worked with healthcare and different things, but you know what? I don't want to really talk about just about what I do in healthcare and how I help people and things, but let's talk about the two countries and their similarities and their differences. But you know what? Uh, when you're comparing the two, people, when they retire like yourself, you know what? Can you tell us from your perspective, what was, if you were to turn the clock back around, what you did differently that what I'm hearing made it more successful for you than a lot of people do when they're coming to these countries, especially in your case in Mexico. What did you do really different? Do you think that blog was like the best thing you did coming to Mexico?
yeah, I think that at the time that I was doing the research, which was around 2014, there just wasn't a lot of information online for me to really research. So taking it upon myself to really learn, once I was there was a huge benefit. Now we're going to fast forward almost 9 years, and there are so many resources. There are great YouTube channels out there, several of them about Mexico. You have a fantastic one about Costa Rica, if people want to know about Costa Rica. There's I, my best advice is just to educate yourself before you make the move. Really see if that's for you. Look at things like you talk about healthcare a lot. You're an expert in that, and see, is that for me? Does that meet my needs? Does that housing meet my needs in that country? What are what are things are going to cost there? What kind of extra spending money am I going to have? I think it's just educate yourself. That's why I think I was more successful than most.
Paul, you bring in healthcare. Did you think about that healthcare portion when you got to Mexico? Because you're blessed enough to retire rather early in your life. Did you think about healthcare when you went to Mexico, or was it, that vacation portion in your mind first?
It was the vacation idea, and just, the idea of hanging out on beaches and drinking margaritas and living a carefree life. And to be honest with you, that's it. That's what it is. It turned out to be that. So I was not disappointed. But I was not thinking healthcare. Actually in my head, I thought healthcare was not going to be very good. And I just got that idea in my head, and I was wrong. I was just, not disappointed. I was pleasantly surprised that I was wrong. But I don't know why. I just thought that, coming from the US, we pay so much for it in the US. So it's gotta be phenomenal. So, but no, it was not a priority for me. Not until, you actually live there and things happen and you have to go to a doctor, you have to go see somebody, then you have to know what the healthcare system is and familiarize yourself.
Paul, you mentioned that. Do you know that in Mexico there's 5,000 hospitals in Mexico?
I know there's a lot. I didn't know an exact number.
I want
So
to
you
bring
are the
this.
healthcare guy.
Well, I do work both countries, but one of the things that I find it so interesting is that people don't give that respect or that due of how Mexico has. It's got a population, a huge population. It's got a huge buying power, uncompared to Costa Rica, and there's such a healthcare system in Mexico that it's wow. It rivals some of the things in the U.S. But you know
Mhm.
what? Let's talk about cost and living and affordability in Mexico, and then we'll go a little bit about Costa Rica. But tell us a little about when you first got to Mexico, even now. Um, how does the cost of living in Mexico compare in terms of housing, utilities, food, and expenses? And what did you learn to include after you got there?
Again, we moved there in 2015. At that time, we went to the Riviera Maya, which is a more expensive part of Mexico. It'd be like if you're in Florida, it's more like the Florida Keys, or South Florida. So we expected to pay a little bit more for housing, things like that, even going out to restaurants. But even compared to Florida, where we were in Central Florida, it was cheaper. I used to people would ask me, how much cheaper? And I would say, okay, let's say you made, and you have to, even in the US, when we talk about cost of living and things, it changes. People in California make a lot of money because everything costs a lot of money, so everything has to be relative. So I would tell people in Florida, knowing the cost of living, I say, let's say you made $50,000 in Florida on your pension and you stayed in Florida. If you went to Mexico with that 50,000, it would be like you had 90,000 and stayed in Florida. That's how much better you're living comparatively on the same money. At least that. It's not like you're living in mansions or anything, but you have the extra resources to go out and eat, to go to the grocery store. I would just go to the Pueblo. I remember going to the Pueblo. And this was only just even a few years ago, and getting a big bag of limes for 50 cents. Then we came to the US and my wife sent me for limes to make margaritas. And I came home with like 3 limes and it was like, I don't know, $2 or something. It was ridiculous. And she's like, where's the big bag of limes? It's just a whole different understanding about what things cost. As far as utilities, one thing is more expensive potentially in Mexico than the US, and that is electricity.
A
The
hundred
big reason,
percent, 100%.
yeah, and that one took me by surprise. And the reason is because they punish you for using too much electricity. And we're all used to, okay, I'm paying so much per kilowatt hour. And if I use more, then I pay more because I'm paying so much per kilowatt hour. But that's not how it works. They'll be like, okay, you should only be using, say, 400 kilowatts this month. So if you used 500, you're going to pay for the extra 100, obviously. But if you consistently do that, we're going to identify you as on average, about 380% more for your electricity starting from kilowatt number one. So we were like, I don't know, thrifty with electricity. I would be in there, I'd turn the AC on, and my wife would run in there and she'd be like, I think it's cool enough in here. It was like constant. We have people would move down from the US and Canada, and we'd stop by their condos and we'd be like, it's pretty cool in here. You might want to watch that. It's going to be expensive. And they would say the same thing every time. Oh no, Paul, it's not too bad. I think it came to like $250, and we can do that. We can handle that because we have dogs and things. And I'm like, it's going to be a lot more than $250. Watch. They said, no, we use the same amount of electricity every month. And I'm like, it's not going to matter. About month 4, they're like, I have a $600 bill. Welcome to Mexico. You've been punished for being a high user.
Paul, it's funny that you mentioned that, because in Costa Rica, we have something similar, but it's a little bit different. A lot of our electricity, actually almost 90% of our electricity, is actually renewable. It's been with the rivers and the dams that they do, they create the electricity. But it is more expensive. Just as you say, if I use amount of electricity, and I could have a serious bill. And can you imagine, we're almost 100% on renewable energy, and I pay more than I paid in the US.
It's crazy, isn't it? And so just to clarify for people, you're not technically you are being charged more, but also they subsidize electricity a lot in Mexico. So they'll say you're not getting the subsidy and we're charging you more. So you really get like triple whammied on that. Some of them is 380% more you're paying. That's crazy.
It is crazy about the electricity, because I fight with it, and kind of I do the same thing you do. I'll turn on the AC, and I say, it's cool enough. And the wife says, whoa, it's cool enough, but can you leave it on? And I'm like, well, go ahead. I'm going to give you the bill this month, and then we could leave it on. Then it probably changes.
So it's funny because after many years of living in Mexico, we had to come back to the US not too long ago just to look after Linda's mother, my wife's mother, who's getting older and needs more assistance. So we ended up buying a house again in the US. And then, I was worried about the electric bill because it's a house. And so
oh my God.
Yeah, I know. So then I was like, we get the first electric bill. I'm like, how much is it? She's like, it's $90. And I'm like, okay. The next month it's like $86. And I'm like, wow, we would pay so much more. We've got the AC on and stuff. That's the only thing that I was fantastic place. Your money goes a lot further.
Yeah, not
Fantastic.
wrong. But Paul, did you find it in Mexico as well as in Costa Rica here, that when you're buying American products in Mexico, the difference in price, does it happen to you too?
Yeah, American products, you're going to pay more for them. With your laundry detergents and stuff, just use something that's more local. You don't have to run to your Tide and things. We were always pretty thrifty, and we're trying to live on just a portion of the income we were used to. So that part was easy, just changing over to local products. I don't think I can't think of anything from the US we absolutely had to have that brand.
People like, I like this. There's this sausage that I like, this Johnson sausage that is the one from the Midwest. Oh my gosh, I love that stuff. But that sausage here is almost $12.
Wow.
And I'm like, and I look at it, I'm like, but Paul, I'll even take it a step further. Kind of like what you talk when you live in the Riviera Maya, portions of the beach where you put that at the beach, it actually doubles in price.
Yeah.
And you start paying. So one of the things that I tell people when you're moving to Costa Rica, that you try to assimilate your living to be more local because then I don't know about you, Paul, but don't people tell you about getting gringo priced? And you know what? You're getting gringo price with this, and you're getting gringo price with that. Well, you're gringo pricing yourself on buying these products that you left it for one reason, and it's crazy. But you know what, Paul? Let me get into this other line. You know, when you decided to live in Mexico, okay, and you're doing your residency, uh, what's as a retiree, what is the amount that you minimum have to have?
Yeah, when we did it, we had to show an income. I think at that time was probably around 2,300 a month, but it's much, much higher now. And then it was an extra, I think 400 for my wife. So we had to, I think our total was about 2,400, but people are talking about now around $4,000 a month income they're having to show to qualify for residency in Mexico. It's insane.
As a retiree?
As a retire anybody, if you're going to go there as a foreigner, you only have a few different visa options, and one of them is economic solvency. I mean, unless you're going to marry somebody there, you're adopting Mexican children, you're a rich investor. If you buy a house valued over a certain amount, which is now based on the minimum wage, so that's probably well over $200,000 on your property there to qualify. You have to show economic solvency. So you're going to have to show that you have so much in savings or investments, or you're making so much per month in pensions, something like that. And it's shooting around the $4,000 mark. It's crazy. A lot of these retirees
Wow.
are just, they're priced out. They can't go there. While you're talking, I'm actually going to tell you what San Diego consulate is doing this year, because it's they put everything on
Well,
their site.
you know
So I'm
what,
going to tell you
Paul?
exactly what they're charging.
Paul, you know what? While you're looking that up, I'm going to tell you what it is here in Costa Rica. Do you know here in Costa Rica, as a retiree, the minimum requirement is only $1,000.
Wow.
That's the minimum required as a retiree, as long as you meet the FBI requirement and other things that you need to bring this paperwork. But it's $1,000. Okay,
Wow.
To-
That's
just
so affordable. I mean, a lot of people on Social Security can make that.
yeah,
They
no,
can't make this. They
no.
can't make this. This is from the Mexican consulate in San Diego, and it says in order to get temporary residency, which is easier, it's a lower value than permanent residency. You have to show monthly income of $4,393 to show you consistently got that with the last 6 bank statements.
Wow. So
That's crazy.
$4,000. Yeah, no.
Over four. That's crazy.
Paul, I'll even go with the residency for temporary residency as an investor. You only have to show temporary residency as a $150,000 property if you want to do temporary as an investor.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
But as a retiree, you do $1,000. And they're okay with that. Well, it's crazy how that even. But I don't know about in Mexico. Do you need a lawyer to do residency in Mexico?
You don't need a lawyer. They made it a little bit easier. You still have paperwork to fill out in Spanish, things like that. You have to get an appointment, which can be a pain. My recommendation is usually to hire somebody local to help you with that, but you don't have to have somebody. But it's still a recommendation to make it easier. But what about in Costa Rica?
You don't have to have a lawyer, and it's actually you can do it, but same thing. It's the language barrier that thing stops a
Mhm.
lot of people because they're not very open on. Hey, you know what? This is exactly. They'll show you the steps, but they don't tell you that you have to go to this place and drop it off here, and you have a time limit, and all these things that you have to do.
Yeah, the
Sometimes they're
nuances, the little, yeah.
yeah, and then I don't know if it happens in Mexico, but it happens in Costa Rica that this month it's this way, and next month could be a different way.
Yeah, that happens in Mexico constantly. And I'll do a video about how to get residency and how to do it yourself. And then all these people write, well, at this particular immigration office, they wanted this extra piece of paper. And then the next week wanted something different. And I'm like, that's Mexico. It's very difficult to make a tutorial video about bureaucracy in Mexico because it just changes. It's like on a whim, they'll just change things without changing the actual procedure. Just
Yeah,
do it.
and as Americans, we have that virus that says, you know what, it should be this way, but you're
Yeah.
into a country, you have to assimilate to that. But
Yeah. That's definitely something you have to get used to. Moving to Latin America is just, that cultural thing that's just not as important there to them. It's just not.
No, no. You know what, Paul, do you think it's wrong to have that? Because we here in Costa Rica, we have that issue a lot of times to say, pura vida. And they live, I live in, I think in Latin America, they live for today and not
Mhm.
planning for tomorrow. And as Americans, we're always, oh, we're going to do this, we got to retire for this and worry about this. We're worried about always tomorrow, but we don't live today.
Mhm.
We go through the motions of today, but we live for tomorrow. And they have it the opposite. They live for today and they whim the tomorrow. And it's like, oh, somebody's gonna, but I don't know, do you think it's wrong?
I don't know if it's wrong. It's just it is a cultural difference, and it's things I've discussed with people in Mexico too. They're always like, "Oh, your Americans come down here, and we're even as retirees, and you're like, let's start a business, let's do this, and everything's work, 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 and let's." It's like even when you're retired, you don't rest. You're
Yeah,
just so it's just such a go, high paced, culture you come from. They're always like, relax, relax, enjoy
yeah,
yourself. And the other thing we had to get used to in Mexico, and a lot of folks do, is like you talked about, people, and not everyone, we're generalizing here, obviously, are more interested in the overall enjoyment of life and a more of a, I don't know, more of a well-rounded view of life. Let's spend time with family, we'll work, but we're not going to work so much that we're not spending time with family. So we would call people and be like, hey, we want to get our condo painted. And they're like, yeah, we've made enough money this month. Maybe call us back next month. And you're like, what?
that happens there
What?
too.
Yeah. And you're like, how do you run a business like that?
You,
It's-
you know what? A common term here in Costa Rica is pura vida. So
Mhm.
I'm late, pura vida. I'm gonna do it tomorrow, pura vida, no problem. And I guess as Americans, we come in like, that's not an answer. It's,
Yeah.
but Paul, we left the a beautiful country of the U.S. to be guests in these other countries, but we
Mhm.
expect to keep what the U.S. has taught us for so long. But you know what? Let's talk about the political side and the stability, especially, I think Mexico gets a bad rap for that. But you that live there, what is your take on the political and the social stability and how does that play into the decisions for moving to Mexico? How did it play for you anyway?
I mean, that was a big reason we actually went to Mexico. My wife is originally from Colombia, and Colombia has always had a lot of, political issues, not as bad as Venezuela and some of the other areas. But I mean, they've had rebel armies and everything else. So in looking at Mexico and smaller countries sometimes that have had such turbulent, um, like government changes like Grenada, and you look at these small countries, the larger the country, I've always felt, the harder it is to steer that ship, to turn it. And hopefully I would see it enough in time that we could leave. Mexico is a very large republic. They've got their Senate and everything else. And it's not something it's so large that it's not something I expect would wake up the next day and you're like, who's in charge today? What just happened today? You know, like it suddenly becomes like a Granada or something. So that stability of just having such a large republic and not being able to turn the ship quickly always made me feel more comfortable. I was like, okay, if we move to Mexico and the political tide is turning more against foreigners or something else, it's going to be a slow turn. And so we'll be able to see that, bounce back to the US, bounce to another country, continue our adventures. But it never happened. And again, we were down there for many years full time, and now we're just kind of part time back and forth while we work out mom issues. But as soon as we hope to be back down there full time. Next time, we're actually going to go to central Mexico and stay in the mountains there. We're going to move to the mountains. My dermatologist said I spent too many years on a Caribbean beach and it tore up my
Oh
head,
my
my
gosh.
skin. So he says, don't do that anymore.
Your hairline's going to be messed up if you keep on doing that.
Yeah, my hairline.
Paul,
I
tell
enjoyed too much time on a Caribbean beach.
Paul, that's something that in Costa Rica, say, for a lot of years, Costa Rica has been blessed enough not to have an army. I think
Hmm.
both a
True.
blessing, and they've focused a lot on health and education, and it's given the country, I think, that attraction that you're talking about. But you know what? Being a small country, everybody knows each other, everything's going. So yes, it's but it's lived so long like this that it's kind of like it's been that haven for a long time that you're talking about. But yeah, I
Yeah.
see Mexico just grow that
And I think when we looked at going to other smaller countries, obviously Costa Rica was very high on the list because even though it is smaller, in population, everything, it is very stable. It is very linked to the US, it has a stability you don't see in all through Latin America. So it's unique in that. And you do have a level of safety you don't see all through Mexico. I mean, obviously there's some security issues in parts of Mexico. We've
No,
traveled all through it.
there's something there
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. But I like to remind people it's a huge country, it's just huge. So there are some security concerns and things that Mexico needs to work on. But for the average retiree being there, it's not an issue, It's just
Mexico
a
gets a bad
great
rap
place for
about
anybody who goes
that.
further. Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
in some cases they've earned it. I mean, they do have organized crime, and organized crime does some heinous things, especially to prove to their rivals and everything else, you know, not to mess with them, and also to create a situation where the government doesn't want to intercede because it's a very shock and awe. So people in Mexico are just generally very peace loving people. They don't want a lot of, ripples. They don't want anybody being affected. So when there's some push on some of these organized crime things, they go full shock and awe. They'll start, they'll take buses and set them on fire. They'll make these big productions of things so all the people in the town will be like, it's not worth it, and tell the government to stop. It's not worth it to us. Just stop. So that's another reason why you see that level of violence, because it works. It's the whole. They're like, we would just rather everything be calm again. And so that's why you'll see that over and over with a lot of those incidents in Mexico. And it's just a cultural way to look at it, where I don't think you would ever see that in the US. If you had, and there's organized crime in the US, if they rose to the level that they're going full shock and awe, trying to make the public leave them alone because it's more, I don't see Americans ever doing that. I think that they would just throw more at them, it's just not going to work. But in Latin America, that works. It works in other countries too.
In Costa Rica, some of the things that you're talking about, they do a lot of protests. They'll assemble, they'll get things in place, but that extreme portion, I don't think that Costa Rica is quite and that.
Hmm.
But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's areas in Costa Rica that because of the drugs and things that have been influenced in the area, sadly, there's some areas that are coming across and similar traits of what was seen before, but they're actually the government has taken that very seriously, and they are attacking it. You know what? To each his own of what people do, but uh, you look at a country living here, spending so many years without an army and all this, and then they
Hmm.
like, oh, they're fresh for the picking. It's sad. Don't just keep your stuff and don't do stuff like that. Hurt a hold a cultural and just hurt a people. But you know what? Let's get in on quality of life in Mexico, and we'll do a little bit about Costa Rica. And I'll start it off with one of the reasons why I chose Costa Rica, not just because my parents were Costa Rican, but I found that quality of life and the balance between what you have and the time that you have, like even to make this streaming today, I would have never done it in the U.S. It's have you found that also in Mexico is the quality of life? What did that look like? Because I think the quality of life has a price.
Hmm. Yeah. And, when it comes to quality of life in Mexico, it's like anywhere else. If you have the financial means to be able to do other things, That's a big aspect. So, a lot of people in Mexico end up going to the US, whether legally or illegally, because they can make money to send home because they just lack that other aspect. As far as quality of life, if you can get a really good quality of life in Mexico on a fraction of the price that you would pay in the US, I'm sure the same in Costa Rica and through much of Latin America. So if you have those resources, that's fantastic. And that's why I tell people, if you're going to move there, you got to have some plan. I'm sure whether you're going to Costa Rica or Colombia or wherever you're going, and one of the plans should be, okay, you want to have this great quality of life and a low price tag, but you got to be thinking, how am I going to fund that? I don't need as much money, but I have to have something. So what am I going to do? And, nowadays, especially since COVID, with so many remote jobs, that's a great way to do it for a lot of people. That checks that box. So some folks start a business, like, you have a business in Costa Rica. That's fantastic. I debated starting a business in Mexico. I just never really got around to it. I may at some point, maybe when we're in
No, you, Paul, you?
Querétaro. Yeah, maybe. I want to do a microbrewery. I looked at a microbrewery, but
Nice.
yeah,
You
maybe
know,
someday it'd be fun.
talking about business, Paul, um, how has there's something that's affected here really heavily is the dollar. The dollar's
Mhm.
value that used to be and what it is today. How did you guys plan for that? Did you plan for the value of the dollar to go down to a certain point in Mexico? Like, I'll give you an example here in Costa Rica. We used to be almost 700 colones at one point at this highest point, and now it's at 495, a little bit under 500, which was that rate of exchange was about 20 years ago. How
Mhm.
how's that happened in Mexico?
That's the same thing we saw there. And so what I learned to do is to take advantage of exchange rates to make my money go further. It's something I taught a lot on YouTube. Is is I would tell people, if you get like a pension or you got money come to the US, is to always put it in your US bank or your foreign bank and time your transfers based on exchange rates. Because you'll see things that'll influence exchange rates in the short term. Could be maybe a trade agreement, something. So it'll cause a spike. So me actually waiting sometimes a week and a half to move money would put enough extra money on the same amount. I'd get more pesos that would actually cover like three of my bills, my electric bill, water bill, and something on the exact same amount. And when we saw a huge change, we took advantage of it. COVID was a huge change. The dollar got super strong against the peso, against everybody, right? In tough economic times, what people do is they invest in the US dollar, the Swiss franc, certain other currencies. It shot up to its highest ever. So I told people online, move as much money as you can now and get your pesos because it's not going to last. And I was criticized by a lot of people when I was telling them um, to move a lot of money when it was sitting around, gosh, around 25, 26, 28, right? Pesos to the dollar. And now it's at 16. And everybody's like, oh, Paul, you were right. Yeah, I was right. Because overnight, your dollar was worth like 40% more. Why wouldn't you move money? So you have to take advantage of those things. So right now, the dollar is super weak. Not to get into whole political
Right.
things. What caused that in the U.S.? Makes me wonder if anybody in Congress has ever had an economics class in their life, because they created a scenario that's going to cause the weak dollar and cause this train wreck. But uh, for when you're living abroad, suddenly, your money's not going as far. And that's why you really have to pay attention to exchange rates. So when you get a swing back, you move more money on those swings, like a COVID swing or a trade agreement swing, to kind of keep it for that rainy day. Because this is lean. I've got people complain in Mexico all the time. Hey, at this exchange rate, my money's not going very far at all anymore. You know?
And you know what? It's funny that you say that because it happens here also. We're doing the same thing. It's at some point it was the dollar was going much, and now it's going. Oh, we're on high road. But I told people the same thing at that time. I didn't have a YouTube channel at the point, but I said, you got to do it now. You got to bring exchange, and now it's the opposite. And and people are like, oh, I have these colones, and even the loans are coming out better in colones than they are in dollars now. And
Hmm.
it's like it's crazy what you're saying is so true. But um, people don't plan for those things. You don't plan for the exchange rate to drop so much.
Yeah, people should just, like I said, you watch those for rainy days, a big spike, and political changes, like you have a US election coming up. Depending how that goes, you're going to see a dollar shift. So you really watch, right after an election. If people think it's going to be a president who's really pro economy, you're going to see a surge, in those dollars. And that doesn't always last. You'll see that little surge, it might kind of come back. So that's when you should move money. People should pay attention to those things. And some of the criticism I used to get were actually from forex traders, people that trade foreign currency for a living, because they're like, Paul, you can't predict the future. And I'm like, I'm not predicting the future. I'm taking advantage of the present. Because unlike international, currency trading, where you're buying a foreign currency, hoping that, it will increase in value against your dollar so you can sell it and get your dollar back, I'm only going in one direction. I'm buying pesos. So if today I gave you so much money and I got 4,000 pesos, and I wait 1 week and I give you the same amount of money and I got 5,000 pesos, that's better, right? Because I'm not selling them back. So I'm just taking advantage of the present. All I'm telling people to do is pay attention and seize opportunities. And you're going to see, depending, anytime with the US election, watch right after the election. And it depends who wins, what the optimism will be for an economic recovery. And then watch what that does to the dollar. And it doesn't last. Usually you'll see a spike. So that might be something to watch to see if that's a good time for people to move money to another currency. If you live in Mexico and you're moving it in one direction, you're putting your bank account there, or in Costa Rica, and you're spending it like that, what does it matter, right? You did better than you did the week before. You got more local currency in the bank than you did.
Yeah, people think a lot of times, oh, I'm going to keep it. And then the other thing I think they always, something that's a big mistake, I think, is they bring their social security and they want to place it. Let me do the direct deposit directly
Yeah.
into the bank here in Costa Rica or in Mexico. I think it's such an error, an error in two ways. Kind of look, one in exchange rate, and two also with when you do bring it over. And you know how you talked about in one of your videos about when they check to see where you're at, if you're alive.
Mhm.
What's that? That they
Yeah,
proof
the
of
proof of life
proof,
form, as you
proof of
call it. I
life.
forgot what the actual form number is.
Yeah, the proof of life, and they'll cut you off. And
Hmm.
if you stay in the U.S., leave it in the U.S., they start leaving because what people don't know is that a lot of times if you do move it, you can say, you know what, he's in that Kuru Paul, he's in Mexico.
Hmm.
He doesn't need quite as much. We could probably drop his rate because his cost of living is a lot less. And there's government law that allows for that. And people don't know that you can get your rate dropped. But you know what, Paul? We've talked a lot. I think we're going to put a summary to all this. Based on all the factors we talked about, if someone is thinking about moving to Mexico, in your opinion, in your summary, what are the things that should influence their decision the most? Is it exchange rate? Is it the home? Is it that they should? And we talk about this: is should they buy first? And everybody says, "Oh, you got to rent first." And what worked best for you?
I usually tell people, if you don't speak any Spanish, then try to go to one of the hubs where expats go to, because you're going to find a community that's going to help you figure out how to do everything. And those areas do cost more. I recommend you rent before you buy. But it's like foreign, I don't know, foreign living with training wheels. You show up, people realize you're not a tourist, and everybody, you're like, I don't know how to register my car. Oh, I'll go with you, Paul. I don't know how to open a bank account. I'll go with you, Paul. And then once you start to know Mexico and you feel more comfortable and you want to get something that's, I don't know, more cost effective, you can leave that expat area and go to a more local neighborhood or another town where your money's going to go a lot further. You're going to know how to get things done. Hopefully your Spanish is getting better. Focus on learning Spanish, folks. It's, I mean, otherwise it makes life difficult. You're going to be stuck in those expat areas. But, just don't be afraid to tell people, you don't know something, and to ask for assistance, and be open to new cultures and ideas. And, when the guy says he's going to be there at 9 o'clock to paint your house and he doesn't show up till 1, don't lose your mind. You should just be like, hey, he showed up. That's awesome.
It's a benefit for just showing up, right?
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to take Paul's line, and Costa Rica, the same thing. If you're thinking about living, do the same thing. It's actually a benefit to be surrounded by expats. But I will caution you with this. Be careful. You know what? Take the same precaution when you're meeting somebody, whether they're expat or local, and give yourself some time to listen, make sure that those are the people that are guiding you, and you're gonna have some bumps on the road. It's
Yeah.
okay, right, Paul? It's gonna be
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You're gonna learn.
It's part of the
If you-
fun, right?
yeah,
It's part of the adventure.
it's part of the adventure, and don't take life so literally serious, because you're gonna go crazy, right, Paul?
Hmm. It's the
You,
whole pura vida, right?
it's all pura vida, but in Mexico, what do they call it in Mexico,
I
Paul?
don't think they really have a term for it. I mean, they don't. You don't get stressed. They'll just say no pasa nada. But we don't have like a term like pura vida.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you guys, I've had some great interviews, but this one right here is just, to me, it was fun. We're talking about two different countries, about how things are going on, the differences, the similarities. I hope this information, and Paul, you know what? Thanks for taking the time to share your experiences of Mexico. But you know what? I'm going to tell you guys, this Paul is not just a Mexico expert. He's also a teacher. He teaches Spanish. And we're
Mm.
going to take some time and we'll talk about that, but we'll do it in another segment. Those of you thinking about living in Costa Rica or even thinking about Mexico, I invite you to visit Guru Paul and his channel. He's got everything about Mexico, as I'm doing here in Costa Rica. I hope you like this information. I hope it was useful for you. Pura vida, and always be safe.